As Mark and Patricia know, in our business, we have a lot of clients who suffer from this affliction. And the more that we know, the better that we can be a better advocate, the better, just so that we can be more understanding and compassionate. So I thank you guys all for joining us this morning. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce Sheila and Michael, and I'm going to go ahead and let them start the program, because I want to make sure that they have enough time and that we have plenty of time to ask questions and get them answered. So Sheila is the program manager. I'm going to let you tell everybody, because you do a much better job. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. So my name is Sheila Griffith, and I am the program manager from the Alzheimers Association. And as Connie said, she's doing a great job here coordinating this series. So we're just trying to, this is our outreach, our education and outreach from the Alzheimer's Association. And we hope for the cure, of course, for this disease. But in the meantime, this is the way we really would like to, it's almost a way of fighting the disease, is spreading education, making people more aware, and being able to understand it better. We think will help us as we move through the disease of those who are affected by the disease. So I'm here today with a volunteer, community educator. This is Michael Smith. Michael, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Sheila. As Sheila indicated, and thanks again, Connie, for creating the series and affording us the opportunity to speak with your colleagues there in the Rockville Chamber of Commerce. I retired from Georgetown University last fall as Director of Affirmative Action in our Office of Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Affirmative Action. And since January of this year, I've been a volunteer with the association. I'm a community educator and also a support group leader. So I'm delighted to join Sheila this morning in offering the presentation.
I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we'll get started.
Okay, so understanding Alzheimer's and dementia. As Connie alluded to a few moments ago, we're wanting to make sure we give you a high overview, if you will, of Alzheimer's and dementia. And what we're hoping in terms of learning objectives this morning, if we can go to the next slide. We're hoping that you'll take away from this morning's presentation is an understanding of the relationship between Alzheimer's and dementia, find out how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain, explore the risk factors and stages of the disease, learn about current research and Food and Drug Administration, FDA approved administration treatments that address some of the symptoms, and identify how the Alzheimer's Association can be a resource to you, your various organizations, your employees, and your clients. Why don't we go to the next slide? So clearly, Alzheimer's is a global crisis, and you're likely hearing more and more about it in your personal lives and on the news. Matter of fact, in yesterday's Washington Post, there were two articles dealing with Alzheimer's. One was a front page article, and one was in the health section. And we'll talk a little bit more about the two of those momentarily. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. So in this slide, it's asking how many Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's. And if you'd like to maybe take a guess, anybody wants to come off mute and maybe take a guess? Is it 850,000, 5.7 million, 12 million, or 3.4 million?
3.4.
12 million.
Okay. Thanks for the guesses. The correct answer is 5.7 million. So currently there's 5.7 million. I saw another piece of research not too long ago that suggested 6 million. Barring any developments in prevention or treatment methods, this number is projected to reach 14 million by 2050. That's an astronomical number, almost triple the number of current individuals with the disease. Currently, an estimated 50 million people worldwide are living with dementia. Here's another question for you. Let's go to the next slide if we can. How many unpaid caregivers do you think are providing care in the United States for individuals living with Alzheimer's? Anybody want to take a guess? Is it 1.2 million, 8.5 million, 13 million, 16.1?
8.5.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my guess also.
Okay. So the correct answer, currently there's 16.1 million Americans providing unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's or other dementias. Alzheimer's impacts caregivers both at home and at work. More than 80% of care provided at home is delivered by family members, friends, or other unpaid caregivers. Over half of employed caregivers report having to go to work late, take time off, or quit altogether due to caregiver demands. These caregivers provided approximately 18.4 billion hours of care last year, valued at more than $232 billion. So as you can see, this disease takes a very personal toll and impact on individuals facing it, as well as a financial one. So let's learn a little bit more about the stats about the impact of Alzheimer's. We can go to the next slide. And here is a okay, so what did you think of the statistics? Did anything surprise you? Anybody want to share anything?
It didn't surprise me, but it's also, it's important to know how many are out there, but if you are a family member of somebody with Alzheimer's, it's really important.
Yeah, definitely. If you're a family member of somebody with Alzheimer's, getting, as we're doing this morning, getting information, understanding the tremendous impact Alzheimer's has, being the 6th leading cause of death, more people dying from Alzheimer's than the combination of breast cancer or prostate cancer, which are 2 leading impacts of women and men in terms of disease and illness and potential death. But it is amazing realizing the impact Alzheimer's has and how widespread it can be.
Michael, I have a quick question. The
Sure.
projections, is that because of all the baby boomers now moving?
That's a great question. Part of that answer is yes, because of the baby boomers. You know, as we age, there's a larger percentage of the population that are now 65 plus. Age is a major factor in the potential for Alzheimer's or dementia. So yeah, that's a good point. Sheila, is anything you'd want to add?
Yeah, the other piece of it is diagnosis. We're diagnosing it now, where it was a mystery for many years. And so I know you'll touch on that later, but the diagnosing techniques are so much better now that we're getting the diagnosis.
Yeah, at one point, I think the 100% confirmation of the diagnosis had to occur after death with autopsy.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are various tests that can be done that can predict Alzheimer's as it's in its various stages.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move to the next slide, which we're on now. So you may hear the term Alzheimer's and dementia used interchangeably. In this section, we're going to discuss both Alzheimer's and dementia and how they're related, but also how they're different. Let's kind of quickly talk about Alzheimer's for a second. Do you think Alzheimer's is a normal part of the aging process? Anybody want to venture a guess?
False.
That's true. That's true. It's false. You know, sometimes in certain communities, I know sometimes in some communities, particularly my mother's generation, you know, oh, girl, I got that Alzheimer's disease. I can't remember where I put my keys. I can't remember where my car is. But that's not true. Alzheimer's is not part of the normal aging process. It's truly a disease that impacts. I mean, I've got a relative who's 94 years old. My wife's aunt, she's as sharp as a tack. So, you know, it has nothing to do with the aging process. And clearly Alzheimer's is more than memory loss. It's a progressive and fatal disease that kills nerve cells and tissues in the brain, affecting an individual's ability to remember, think, plan, and ultimately function. And as we'll see, the disease impacts various parts of the brain, and that's why we see eventual deterioration, whether it's short-term memory, long-term memory, the ability to speak, the ability to walk, swallow, things of that nature. So it's a progressive disease that's impacting various components of the brain. Let's go, where are we? People younger than 65. So yeah, people younger than 65 can also develop Alzheimer's. Do you think that's true or false?
True.
It's true.
Yep.
Very true. It's very sad.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more individuals with what's called either early onset dementia or younger onset dementia. Approximately 200,000 Americans younger than age 65 are living with the disease. Matter of fact, my late wife was diagnosed at the age of 53 with early onset dementia, which in 3 years became Alzheimer's. So clearly, people develop the disease in their 40s and 50s. So it's amazing how it's impacting individuals, and it's pretty scary. And that's why it's important, as we talked about last month, and we'll talk a little bit more this morning as well, the importance of a healthy lifestyle, which can majorly impact the potential onset and progression of the disease. Now let's look at a quick slide by Dr. Snyder. She's providing some general explanations about dementia as an umbrella term.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow and the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
So as we heard, there are many causes of dementia, and there are many types of dementia. The late President Ronald Reagan had early onset, he had Alzheimer's, I'm sorry. Robin Williams had Lewy bodies. Glenn Campbell died of Alzheimer's. So, you know, many famous people. And every time we hear of an individual who's passed away from either dementia or Alzheimer's, we hope to raise awareness and get more individuals involved in getting early diagnostics so that people can be tended to, and also raise awareness so that we can assure there's more research and more monies, federal monies, put toward the process of diagnosing and treating Alzheimer's and other dementia and other forms of Alzheimer's. Let's also now hear from a caregiver, Gail, about the importance of knowing her husband's diagnosis of dementia with Lewy bodies.
Certainly, having the diagnosis of Lewy body was helpful in our planning because we began to understand where this was coming from in the brain, where otherwise we would not have known. Like we knew something was happening, but what was it? To give it a label actually helped, although it was a big umbrella. It explains some of the characteristics and symptoms that we were experiencing and seeing.
So Gail makes some good points. Accurate diagnosis, it's important to have an early diagnosis because it allows individuals to seek additional medical options or the advice of specialists. It also allows for early planning and caring of one's personal affairs. It allows for better medical care. Individuals who understand their diagnosis and are active participants in the decision-making process can receive a higher quality of care. Matter of fact, sometimes you'll hear interchange between caregiver or care partner. In the early stages, we often talk about care partner because we are engaged with our loved ones who in the early stages of dementia or Alzheimer's can give input. What would they like to see? Are they willing to participate in clinical trials? How might they wish for their personal affairs to be put in order? Things of that nature. So it's important for early diagnosis because a timely diagnosis allows a person to clearly make plans for the future, legally, financially, and in terms of their care plans. So let's go to the next slide. So in terms of Alzheimer's and dementia, just to recap, dementia is a general term for a collection of symptoms that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. There's about 80% of individuals with Alzheimer's. It's not a part of the normal aging process. It's a progressive brain disease. So that's important to be aware of. Now we're going to take a look at the brain and what it does in terms of Alzheimer's. And we're going to hear from a professional who will talk more about it. This is someone who's an expert and a physician who knows very much about how the brain functions.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alice Alzheimer's described specific changes in the brain, what we call the formation of plaques and tangles. Now, Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and is thought to impact memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. The cerebrum fills up most of your skull. It is part of the brain most involved in remembering, problem solving, thinking, and even feelings. There are about 100 billion nerve cells or neurons throughout the brain that transmit messages in order for us to create memories, feelings, and thoughts. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to the brain tissue loss, or what we call shrinkage, and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, such as memory loss, problems with thinking, planning, behavioral issues, and even at the end stages, problems with swallowing.
Okay, so just to recap, clearly, Alzheimer's affects different pieces of the brain, and it is progressive. Now let's talk some about risk factors. In the next slide, there's a question. What is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's disease? What do you think it is? Is it genetics, family history, or age? Anybody?
Age. No, that's not right.
I say genetics, but isn't genetics and family history kind of the same thing?
Yeah, I'm going to go with genetics.
Okay. Often people do think indeed it's genetics, but the reality is it's age. Age is the major factor. Speaking of that, in yesterday's Washington Post, there was a study which indicated that 72% of people who have a parent or sibling with dementia are likely to develop dementia themselves. And this came from the American Heart Association, and they published a study in the journal called Circulation. However, here's the interesting thing in terms of age. Again, it's more of an issue of age, but the study indicated people who have healthy lifestyles are reducing that risk of family history. So again, what we talked about last month, if you're eating healthy, you're not eating saturated fats, but eating more leafy greens and vegetables and fruits. If you're active, at least 150 minutes a week, or 3 miles a day in terms of physical activity, being social, making sure you're engaging your brain and learning new things of that nature. That kind of lifestyle change reduces. That study that I mentioned, there was a 51% reduction in the potential risk of any form of dementia. People had a lifestyle change. So age is what is the greatest risk factor, and having that lifestyle change will reduce, even as we age, the potential for Alzheimer's. So let's go to the next slide. So let's hear from another expert. This is Dr. Heather Snyder.
Alzheimer's disease is marked by specific brain changes that result in the clinical changes in individual experiences. That is, changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal. The exact cause for these changes is unknown, but there are some hints as to what may contribute to an individual's risk. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. And when we look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also a known risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are two categories that could potentially be involved: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes increases an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantee that the person will develop the disease.
Okay, so in addition to the main risk factors that Dr. Snyder talked about for the general population, Hispanics, African Americans, and women are at higher risk for Alzheimer's. Research has shown that older Hispanics are about 1.5 times as likely as older whites to develop Alzheimer's and other dementias, while older African Americans are about twice as likely to develop the disease as older whites. The reason for these differences is not well known or understood, but researchers believe that the higher rates of vascular disease in these groups may also put them at greater risk for developing Alzheimer's. And clearly, unfortunately, women are more likely than men to develop the disease. An estimated 3.4 million American women are living with the disease today. And part of the reason women are more likely because they live longer than us men. So we know that women live longer, making them more likely to develop Alzheimer's. However, longevity and lower death rates can only partially explain this difference. Researchers are explaining and exploring how genetic differences between men and women may also impact the disease risk. Are there any questions at this point? If not, so let's do a recap on the risk factors. So to quickly summarize, Alzheimer's disease involves the failure of nerve cells, the exact cause of which is still uncertain. However, research has identified risk factors that increase the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. Individuals' risk for developing the disease increases after the age of 65. Family history is a known risk factor. 2 types of genes are associated with Alzheimer's risk. Genes and deterministic genes, as one of the health experts talked about, Hispanics, African American, and women are at an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's. So, being aware of these things, hopefully, as we engage our clients, we can work with them to make sure that they're aware of lifestyle changes. As we mentioned earlier, eating more healthy, engaged in more physical activity, things of that nature. Now, let's talk a little bit about.
have one question.
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Do you have any data on the Asian population? Because I work with the elderly Asian population.
Sheila, I'll defer to Sheila on that. So
That's a great question, and we do not. We have studies now where that's as far as we've gotten is Hispanics, African Americans, and women. But Asian Americans right now, that's one of the things we're looking at very closely to see if they're at higher risk. In general, the preliminary data shows that they're not at a higher risk the way Latinos can be and African Americans can be, but more to come on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now let's talk. Any other questions? I'm sorry. Great question. If there's no additional questions at the moment, let's talk about the stages of Alzheimer's disease. And let me be clear, no two individuals experience the symptoms and progression of Alzheimer's disease in the same way. So, there's no linear stage to say, okay, A, B, C, D, or that sort of thing. It's all individualistic. It's dependent on that person's history, their health, their lifestyle, things of that nature. We're going to hear from another expert, Dr. James Hendricks, on why this is the case, as well as from some individuals describing what it's like to live with the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. So why don't we move to the next slide and hear from Dr. James Hendricks.
One of the things that impacts our brain is all the other things that can happen to us as we age. And we know that Alzheimer's, the most common risk factor for getting Alzheimer's disease is age, but we also have lots of other things that go wrong with us as we age. And so how those other health factors impact our brain can also impact how Alzheimer's presents in other people.
Okay. So clearly symptoms can worsen over time. But again, people progress through the various stages at different rates as their abilities change. On average, a person with Alzheimer's lives 4 to 8 years after diagnosis, but can live as long as 20 years, depending on other factors. Matter of fact, a dear friend of mine, a former colleague at Howard University, her mom died last week in her early 80s after having Alzheimer's for 15 years. On the other end of the spectrum, as I mentioned earlier, my wife was diagnosed in her 50s with early onset dementia, which became Alzheimer's, and she passed away in 2017. So she only was able to fight the disease within a 7-year period. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Okay, so as mentioned, it's important to remember that stages of Alzheimer's are general. Because each person living with the disease has a unique experience, we can't always neatly place an individual into one specific stage or category. In fact, some people may exhibit symptoms that overlap various stages. However, the stages do allow you to gain a general understanding of the progression of the disease. As Alzheimer's progresses, the individual's behavior will change, as does the role of the caregiver. These stages can help caregivers prepare for what to expect and understand how best to respond. So again, you might be initially not only a caregiver, but you're dealing with your loved one or your client who's a care partner because they have some involvement. But over the course of time, Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia may impact what's called activities of daily living and impact various abilities, whether again it's speech, memory clearly, various functions, whether or not they can process information, they can see things. It's a perceptual sort of thing. impacting, the ability to go to the bathroom, to walk, feed themselves, things of that nature. Let's move to the next slide. We're going to hear
Alzheimer's
from
affects
Dr.
everyone
Heather
differently.
Snyder.
As a result, it's difficult to place a person in a specific stage of the disease. However, there are 3 general stages that are commonly referred to as early, middle, and late stage Alzheimer's. In a medical context, you may hear these stages referred to as mild, moderate, and severe. In the early stage of Alzheimer's, an individual may be able to function independently. However, they may start noticing more frequent memory lapses. Friends and family may also begin to notice difficulties in the person, and a healthcare provider may be able to detect problems in memory or concentration by conducting a detailed medical interview. Middle stage Alzheimer's is typically the longest stage and can last for many years. Damage to the brain cells can make it difficult to express thoughts and perform routine tasks, and this can lead to increased feelings of frustration and anger. In the final stage of the disease, an individual loses the ability to hold a conversation, control their movements, or respond to the environment around them. Cognitive skills, that is, their memory, thinking, and reasoning skills, continue to decline, and this can lead to personality changes and need for round-the-clock care.
Okay. So let's do a quick recap on the stages. So clearly there's 3 stages. And again, no 2 individuals experience the symptoms and progression of the disease in the same way. Are there any questions about the stages, by the way? No? Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. FDA approved treatments for symptoms. Let's start by saying what we already know about treatments available for Alzheimer's. There are several drugs available to slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease. How many, by show of hands or response, I should say, believe that that's true, that there are drugs that can slow down the progression of the Alzheimer's disease?
Sorry, Michael, I'm a little behind you. Here it is.
Oh.
There we go.
Okay.
True or false?
True or false?
We think it's true as long as you take it early enough.
Okay. Well, the reality is, unfortunately, it's false. Currently, there is no treatment to prevent or slow Alzheimer's disease. However, the Namenda, Aricept, Exelon, the various medications you may hear that treats Alzheimer's or various forms of dementia can help treat the symptoms. And that's the important thing. One of the things I want to point out in yesterday's Washington Post, and this is a front page article, there's a new drug that's being tested. It's called aducanumab, and it's being produced by Biogen. There's been various clinical trials. One clinical trial suggested that this medication, which is a monoclonal antibody, which attacks the amyloid beta. A lot of the research over the years in terms of treatment of dementia and Alzheimer's always looks at the issue of amyloid, that sticky protein that, if we could only somehow or another get rid of it. On the one hand, there was great success. On the other hand, in the clinical trial, there was not great success. And so the FDA, come June 7th, is going to make a decision whether or not to approve the particular medication. And I know as advocacy groups, such as the Alzheimer's Association, we're pushing for, hopefully, the FDA to approve it. But again, the science is still questioning. The experts out there are still questioning, will this really help? And if it comes out, it's going to be an expensive drug. I know they featured a gentleman by the name of Phil Guttis, who was diagnosed with early onset dementia. And he mentioned that he was in the clinical trial, that the medication helped his brain to feel less foggy, as he called it. He said, he was able to think more clearly. So unfortunately, the jury is still out. This is a promising drug. We'll see what the FDA does in terms of approving this particular medication. And talking about other treatments, there's another slide which we'll hear from Dr. James Hendricks. And again, he's talking about how drugs help relieve the symptoms for a time for people with various forms of dementia or Alzheimer's. So
there are currently several drugs that are FDA approved to treat the cognitive symptoms associated with Alzheimer's disease. They treat the symptoms, but they don't treat the underlying cause. So eventually people will progress, but they do treat some of the symptoms and help people for a time. So the first class of drugs are cholinesterase inhibitors. These drugs work to prevent the breakdown of acetylcholine, which is a chemical messenger found in the brain that's associated with learning and memory. There are 3 FDA-approved drugs that are in this class of drugs. There's Aricept, there's Exelon, and there's Razidine. There's another class of drugs that's modulates glutamate, which is another chemical messenger in the brain that's associated with learning and memory. And this drug is called Namenda. And then there's a final class, which is actually a combination of cholinesterase inhibitors and glutamate modulator, and this is called Namzaric.
Okay. So just to recap, the 3 types of drugs that are out here so far, and those treatments only address some of the symptoms of Alzheimer's in some people. They don't treat the underlying cause of the disease. I know for my wife, she was on Aricept and Namenda, and kind of like as the gentleman in our Washington Post article yesterday mentioned, early on it helped her. She said I didn't feel as foggy. She had some ability to think a little bit clearer, but over the course of time, those didn't help some of the symptoms. And then she moved to some of the other drugs, Exelon as an example.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
I wanted to just say too, this is Sheila, that yes, so that question was sort of a trick question because it says, are there drugs that slow the progression? And as you said, nothing is slowing the progression. It keeps progressing. But I think sometimes the way I describe how these drugs work is Connie's point was true. It has to be given in the early stages of the disease or the early middle stage that's what we've seen for there to be any effect. And it just plateaus people. It just doesn't slow the progression, but it seems like they get on a plateau where they can function a little bit better. But the big thing also about it is, you may have heard if you know people who've been on these drugs, is sometimes they work for some people and sometimes they don't have the same effect for somebody else. So they don't work at all for somebody else. So I know a lot of people that just don't take any of the drugs at all because they don't have an effect.
Thanks, Sheila, for that clarification and sharing that additional detail. That's an important fact that you mentioned.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you say that it plateaus, so then when they get off of the medication, they go back to or they stay where they are and then they start progressing again?
That's Connie, it's a great question again. And I have to say the plateauing is my own term. That's what I've seen of people in assisted living or in a nursing home that I've worked at. That's what it seemed like. Oh, they've been doing, what we would consider well. They're not cured by any man, you know that. But I have anecdotally seen that too, where the family's like, why are we paying for these drugs if they're not really getting cured? And they don't seem to be doing well, so let's take them off the drugs. And I've seen that happen where they take patients off the drugs and they plummet, they do terribly. So, it's kind of, there's no rhyme or reason that I can explain, in this program today. Just that, like sort of the high level explanation is that it works differently for different people. And for some people, you and I could be diagnosed on the same day and we could be the same age. And maybe the drugs aren't going to work at all for me and they work wonderfully for you and your family are happy, that you've on the, whatever drug you're on or whatever combination of drug. So the effectiveness, it's a mystery in some cases. And I have seen people when they go off the drug that it just, not that they pick up where they left off, but they certainly usually get worse from what they were on the drug.
I have a comment. One of my patients was on both Namenda and Aricept. She was doing okay. Then all of a sudden her blood pressure started to rise. It got to the point to 190, 200. And we were so worried that she may have a stroke. And then I finally said, well, let's try, because all this trouble started when she got on these drugs. So cut off and her blood pressure stabilized again. So that's another thing that patients need to watch out for.
That's a great comment too. You know, these drugs are not for everybody. And if they were, we would be having a program called, you know, here's the cure, here's the drug, you know, everybody take it. They're just, and that's a side effect probably for your resident, your patient, that, you know, happens with any drug and you have to be careful about. So it sounds like that drug was not for her, or those drugs are not for her. So unfortunately.
I mean, all drugs and even drugs for various forms of dementia and Alzheimer's have side effects. And so balancing, you know, the pros and cons, the drug is effective in managing some of the symptoms, but the side effects are, as you mentioned, impacting blood pressure. And so going off the meds to better modulate blood pressure, because you don't want somebody to stroke out or have other coronary sorts of issues. So yeah, it's a delicate balance. And that's why it's always critical to engage our healthcare providers and what have you in those discussions to make sure the unique circumstance of our clients or patients are being addressed, and the pros and cons in their unique circumstances. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about advancing Alzheimer's research. In the last decade, researchers have made enormous strides in understanding how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain. Many recent insights point toward promising new strategies for treatment, prevention, and diagnosis. Okay, scientists are looking for new ways to treat Alzheimer's, and there are many drugs currently in the research pipeline. As we heard, let's click on this box.
Okay.
This is an incredibly exciting time in Alzheimer's and dementia research. The advancements that we've made in the last decade to understand the disease as a continuum, meaning that the biological changes are starting a decade or more before someone is experiencing the changes in the memory and thinking. This sets the stage for possible prevention. The idea that when we have the tools to identify those individuals at the earliest time point, and when we have the interventions to target individuals at that earliest time point, we can intervene to stop or slow the progression of the disease before an individual loses their memories.
Okay.
Shall I do lifestyle factors?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Keep going. Okay.
I'm excited about what we're learning these days regarding lifestyle. One of those things that we've seen in the past of things like exercise and nutrition have now started to gain more momentum to indicate to us that it can change your ability to slow cognitive decline. That is really the first stages of Alzheimer's disease. This may include things like social engagement, mental cognitive training. It can be things such as exercise. It can be nutrition. All those things are now starting to point that they will lower your risk for Alzheimer's disease.
Okay. And is there another one, Sheila?
Yep, here we go.
A lot of hope does come from the Alzheimer's Association, all the research that is being done. Even though there is not a cure today for the disease, I know in my heart there is going to be a cure one day. And I know we're getting closer for that cure. Because even if you fail in a research study, you learn from that failure in the research study. That failure always brings progression.
And here's the last one.
It's nice to see the association spearheading in many ways the emphasis on getting the money at the federal level and at the private sector to get the research done so that someday there will be an effective treatment, hopefully cure, hopefully prevention.
All right. So as we heard from the experts, from Dr. Fargo and Dr. Hendricks and some loved ones, it's especially critical that, you know, there's hope, that there's research out there. And it's very important that people of diverse backgrounds, particularly African Americans, Hispanics, women, participate in clinical trials and clinical research studies, because at an increased risk for developing the disease. And there's opportunity to make sure that we're looking at the various health risks given those populations and how potential research and outcomes can impact them. The other important thing is to realize that there's opportunity to get support, and that support comes through the association, the Alzheimer's Association itself. So let's look at the next slide. So some of the things we just want to recap in terms of research, and we'll talk then about Alzheimer's Association and its various ways we have been a resource. But just to recap quickly, scientists are continuing to work towards advanced research. Participants are needed. So again, if you have clients that are aware of various clinical research, clinical trials, matter of fact, Alzheimer's Association has a link that can get individuals hooked up with clinical trials. People with the disease, caregivers, and healthy individuals without dementia are needed to participate in clinical studies. Both drug and non-drug studies are taking place across the country and online. Clinical studies may provide participants with cutting-edge treatment and additional medical care. As I mentioned, Trial Match is a free clinical study match service that helps for those participating in Alzheimer's research. Clearly, Alzheimer's is difficult. However, no one has to face the disease alone. And let's learn a little bit more about how the association, as I mentioned, can help you all and your clients and family members. So as you can see, the Alzheimer's Association is across the country in all 50 states. It provides direct services to individuals and families facing the disease. The mission of the association is to eliminate Alzheimer's disease through the advancement of research, to provide and enhance care and support for all affected, and to reduce the risk of dementia through the promotion of brain health. Our vision is a world without Alzheimer's disease. And let's hear about Alzheimer's services for some of the individuals who've used them.
Oops. I think I missed it. Let me get back to that, Michael.
Okay, no worries.
I've had a couple of phone calls that I've been able to make in to the call center when I've had a couple of quick questions that I wanted to ask. You know, there's been a couple of nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have questions, you have anxieties, and I was struggling dealing with them, and it's amazing. It was one of the best things I ever did was keeping the call center on my favorites now. Just to know that there's somebody you can call who is aware of what you're going through.
When I went to the Alzheimer's Association website, which is alz.org, there I was trying to find out more about what was Alzheimer's, what really is this disease, what is younger onset Alzheimer's, what is dementia, is there a cure, how long has this been around, how many people are affected by this, where can I go for resources, where can I go for help, what do I do with this? How can I handle this? Is there more people like me out there? Is there someone that I can talk to if I need to? And there I found a support line that's 24 hours a day. And there I found where I can go for workshops, where I can go and read things and postings that people have done, where I can find out what events is happening in the Alzheimer's Association, where I can see how it's affecting people around the globe.
Since I've been diagnosed with dementia, the one place that I know I can go to for assistance and help and support is to the Alzheimer's Association. There are people there that I know by name that I can contact if I'm having a difficult time or if I'm struggling to find some resource, that they will provide that to me.
Okay, so as we've heard and see, there's a 24/7 helpline that's 800-272-3900. There are trained and knowledgeable staff who can help with education, decision-making support, crisis assistance, and resource identification. There's master level clinicians available around the clock to provide in-depth care and consultation. You can also, for yourselves, your clients, family members can go to alz.org. Here in the Washington area, they can go to alz.org/NCA for National Capital Area. It can help identify local community resources. Also, there is something called the Community Resource Finder, which is an online tool to find programs and services in the greater Washington area and things of that nature. So, you know, the Alzheimer's Association is a major resource. And again, Connie, we're appreciative of the fact that you're asking us to join the Chamber in presenting the various topics that we have done so far and hope to do in the future. And we're very much a partner in this journey to help provide support and resources. Are there any questions?
You know, I had put hi, I'm Patricia Dubroff, and I'm a 35-year veteran of arts and healing, using art as a healing modality, working with Dr. Gene Cohen, who did all the seminal research in that field. And so there's ways of ameliorating the disease's effects, obviously no cure yet, but I also very much am concerned about the caregivers. And one of the issues I keep hearing, and we hear a lot in the home care industry, Connie and Mark can back me up on that one, is that family members are not getting sleep. Here they are, family caregivers, untrained, unprofessionals, giving all the love and attention they can, but then it's nighttime and the loved one is not sleeping. And so then they're up fitfully all night long worrying that their loved one's not sleeping. So is there some focus with the Alzheimer's Association on how to get a night's sleep? We all know that sleep is the critical thing for all of us as humans, since we don't have two brains like dolphins.
Right. Sheila, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, well, Michael, you have good, real world experience, and I'll tell you that one of the Alzheimer's Association, we're very, very concerned about the caregiver, and we always, when we're trying to talk with caregivers and provide resources, we say, you know, you're in this equation where there's somebody who has a disease and there's their caregiver. It's almost the caregiver is the more important person in a lot of ways. The person with the diagnosis is going to get care. You know, they're going to see a doctor. We're going to do everything we can to, you know, go all out on all the resources. But what about the caregiver? That's the person who's always second or third or fourth or 10th in line. So we do try to really target caregivers. We actually have programs that are targeting caregivers. One is Living with Alzheimer's for the caregiver. So how do you do it? You've got to get a care team. If you're the first unpaid caregiver, what about paid professional caregivers? You need to look into this. You need to find out what the respite program is in Montgomery County or in your county. How does it work? How do I get in touch with somebody like Connie maybe, or how can she help me? During COVID, it was horrendous. The most stressed out people I spoke with as program manager during that 1 year plus was the stay-at-home unpaid caregiver, the spouse, the close family member, the adult child. through the roof stress level, and not knowing if, you know, this was ever going to end, not knowing how badly it was affecting your loved one, and just the stress of the everyday care. So once, just anecdotally, you know, over the last year, once professional caregivers, home health companies were able to come in to the home and show how much PPE they had and how much protection they had, and the benefit, you just saw it outweigh any fear I have of catching COVID or my loved one. Oh, the stress was just lifted off so many people. The only other caregiver I saw really as stressed out is the caregiver who had their loved one already in a assisted living or in a nursing home. Yeah, you couldn't see your loved one. You couldn't see them. You didn't know. So that was also very stressful. But the good news is that there are a lot of caregiver programs. The bad news is getting the caregivers to contact you and to, before they're at level, you know, red zone, you know, contact me a little earlier in the process. Let's see what we can do. Let's balance it out. Let's get family and friends and neighbors involved, and you know, and professional caregivers, and then see what that all adds up to you. Does it add up to a free day a week? Does it add up to 2 free days a week? For, you know, what, and then what are you going to do? And we actually talk to caregivers. Now, what are you going to do? You got the free time, you know, let's talk about what you're going to do. And we actually do talk about what they should do on their free days or with their free time. So, Michael, can you add anything? I mean, you went through this disease.
Yeah, I was one of those individuals that I was working full time, as I mentioned earlier, for Georgetown University, and still being a caregiver. I was fortunate in that I had various resources. I had my wife in a daycare program. I did have a home health aide that was there in the evenings when she came home. But despite that, trying to work and take care of my wife on the weekends, I was majorly stressed. To your point, Patricia, sleep was precious, and I struggled with that. And at one point, I think I did reach out to the Alzheimer's Association, and they mentioned a place that offers daycare and respite care. It's called Winter Growth. They have a location in Albany, Maryland, and Gaithersburg. So I after much challenge from my loved ones and family members, they said, Michael, you really need to take care of yourself. And so I availed myself of Winter Growth, and I a couple of times on a weekend had my wife spend the weekend overnight at Winter Growth so that I could get some decent sleep. And it is really important for us as caregivers to take care of ourselves. We're not superheroes, even though we think we are, and to really feel that you need a team. You know, the proverbial notion when we raise our children that it takes a village. As caregivers, it also takes a village to take care of our loved ones. And so being able to reach out and get the support we need. And the Alzheimer's Association for me was a great resource too, because at one point they had a support group that talked exclusively about how we as caregivers could take care of ourselves. You know, making sure, you know, I was taking 15 minutes of my day to de-stress, to take deep breaths, to take walks, to engage, again, a couple of times, the home health care aide telling her, you know, I'm going to be about half an hour late just to go stop by my sister and brother-in-law's house to kind of de-stress and have a chat with them, or maybe have a cocktail. So it's important that we take care of ourselves. It's critical.
What a great segue for me to bring up. Thank you for all the resources that the Alzheimer's Association has, you know, that we're able to reach out and all the good works that you guys are doing. But in order to do that, you need funding. And in order to get the money, you do a lot of fundraising. And here with us this morning is Carrie. She works with Faith and Stephanie in that fundraising part. And I thought maybe Carrie could introduce herself and talk about what's coming up in June, the longest day.
That was such a great segue, Connie. It's almost like you're a professional. So thank you very much for having me today. I am Carrie Myatt, and you know, I feel like you're my group because for a very long time I worked at a hospice in Montgomery County. I'm a Montgomery County resident, and everything that Sheila and Michael just said about how the importance of caregivers, just, you know, it's so critical, and it just reminds me of all the wonderful resources and support that Montgomery County has. So we are lucky in that regard. But you are right. All of the services that we provide, the important work that Sheila and Michael are doing, our helpline, our free care consultations, all of that takes money to do so. And so I am part of the development team. I started volunteering with the association as a walk participant, and then have been working on the Longest Day campaign for a little over 2 years. And we just kicked off Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month yesterday. June is that month. It's our big month. And the Longest Day is our second largest signature campaign. It's a national event. It is the summer solstice. This year it falls on June 20th, which happens to be Father's Day. So it's really our opportunity to try to have everyone across the country shine their light on the darkness of this disease, whether it's because they're honoring a loved one, because they work in senior care, or they just are afraid of the disease and we want a cure. So there's so many unique and fun things that I get to work with participants across the National Capital Area to do. You know, it could be anything from having a bake sale with your 6-year-old, you know, son or daughter, to we have bridge clubs and mahjong players and pickleball players. Everything. The sky really is the limit. You're only really, you know, if your lack of imagination is really the only thing that limits what we do for the Longest Day. So we're excited. It's a very busy month, but it's my favorite month because on June 20th, just watching all the participants, you know, sharing their stories and sharing what they're doing. Last year, Sheila hiked up to the top of Sugarloaf Mountain, you know, whether it's working out or whatever it is, just everyone coming together and really raising awareness and helping us increase concern and awareness for the disease. It helps us to not only raise money, but make sure that people are aware of all the resources that we have available. It also helps us get new people who want to become advocates, who we've got some great work in Maryland happening to support home care agencies and our caregivers. So like all of that is made possible because of our large event, the Longest Day, and our even larger event, which I know Faith wanted me to touch on, coming up in the fall, which is our walk. And that happens in 650 communities across the country. The closest one to our Rockville community would be on the National Mall, which is going to be October 9th this year. And I guess the other one to mention would be at the National Harbor. If we have people on the east side of the county, that's going to be on September 25th. And I can add in some links to both websites to tell you more about that. We would love to have your community get involved, whether it's for Longest Day or whether it makes more sense to do walk. We are happy to figure out what fits your needs best or what you're really looking to do and highlight. We are here to help make that happen. And I don't know, I'll stop talking and see if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carrie. I've been working with Faith and Stephanie with the walk, and the more that I learned about the Longest Day. So in case you haven't noticed, our 5-part series starts in June, which is the kickoff of Brain Awareness Month, and also the Longest Day, and it ends in October, so then we can finish up getting everyone excited for the walk. So if you haven't posted your information in the chat, please do so. I know we've gone over. Thank you guys so much for bearing with us. Again, thank you so much, Sheila and Michael, for being here. So informative. And I know that I've learned some things that I didn't know. You can tell when I answered questions incorrectly. And Carrie, thank you for being here to share with us. And I hope you guys get excited. You know, the more that we learn about this, the more that we can provide support. Like they said, there's no cure yet, and we cannot stop it yet. But there is help out there, and there's programs, and the more that we help fund and keep these programs running, it's just so important and so needed. And next month, I hope you guys join us again, because on July 7th, the first Wednesday of the month, we're going to be Sheila is going to be presenting the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. So we're going to keep this going. And I've actually opened this up to anyone. You know, it's important to be a chamber member to support each other, but I just feel this information is really important. So if you have a family member, or if you know someone who's struggling, who wants education and support, please invite them. Please share the link. Because like I said, this is very important to me and my family. And I just want anybody, I just want to help. So again, thank you all for being here. I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to introduce each other. Some people did post in the chat, but I felt the program and the information was more important. So thank you again, Sheila and Michael and Carrie, for joining us.